Department attorneys said the first results from the 2020 census will likely come out in early February. The Trump administration has informed a federal judge of a further delay. The projected release date is now March 6th. For the new state population numbers that determine representation in Congress and the Electoral College for the next decade. The Census Bureau is still trying to fix irregularities it's found in records for last year's count, which was upended by the pandemic and last-minute changes by Trump officials. The new timing means that the chances of President Trump carrying out a plan to alter the numbers are growing dimmer. Lindsay Luong, NPR News, New York.
The Dow is up slightly at 31,019. You're listening to NPR News. Live from Philadelphia, this is WHYY News at 104. Good afternoon, I'm Priyanka Tewari. The Philadelphia District Attorney's Office has received a $1.2 million grant to continue helping families of murder victims. WHYY's Aaron Moselle reports.
The grant will fund the Philadelphia Cares program for another 3 years. The initiative offers families grief counseling, help making funeral arrangements, even assistance getting electricity or water turned back on. District Attorney Larry Krasner says the new funding is needed now more than ever.
We are in a moment when the community and all of law enforcement, victims and survivors, need as much help as they can possibly get.
The new funding comes as homicides continue to surge in Philly. To date, the police department has reported 13 homicides, nearly double the total at the same time last year. In 2020, the city had 499 murders, the highest tally for a single year in 3 decades. Aaron Moselle, WHYY News.
The coronavirus pandemic has created a huge demand for cleaning services. A new initiative is working to make sure that cleaning companies owned by people of color in Pennsylvania don't get left out of the boom. The Disinfect US Coalition has raised $500,000 to provide grants and loans to Black and Latina-owned cleaning companies. Philly social impact investor John Moore helped raise funds after being inspired by the movement for racial justice over the summer.
One of the things that we definitely did know was that there's a disconnect between the world of capital in some cases and Black-owned companies.
The coalition is also helping business owners of color pursue contracts with large institutions that are moving to work with companies where work for similar help. Currently, 32 degrees in mostly sunny today, highs near 35. Clear tonight, lows around 27. Sunny tomorrow, highs in the mid-40s, and Thursday, 25 degrees again with a high near 50. This is WHYY News.
Support for unspreading education. Other contributors include Morgan Stanley, presenting Don't Tell Me Why, their podcast with announcements and 45 interests. 3 minutes an episode, 3 times a week. Users with thoughts on the matter.
From NPR and WQR, I'm Peter O'Dell. And I'm Caroline Borchers. It's Here and Now. With over a week left in President Trump's term, House Democrats pushed through a resolution to call for stripping power by the 25th Amendment. Of course, President Pence has shown no sign to invoke that amendment with the cabinet. And if he doesn't, proceedings for a single article of impeachment, which was formally introduced in the House yesterday, are set for tomorrow. And political congressional correspondent Susan Davis is here with the latest. Hi, Sue. What can we expect to unfold in the next 24 hours?
Well, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has called the House back into session, and already there's debate underway in committee on a resolution by Congressman Jamie Raskin. He's a Democrat from Maryland, and he's also a constitutional lawyer. The resolution is non-binding, it's symbolic, but it's essentially expressing the will of the House. And the resolution calls on Vice President and Majority of the Cabinet to invoke a provision in the 25th Amendment that would allow them to send a letter to Congress declaring the president unfit for office. And when that happens, the vice president becomes the acting president. And there's a process for the president to contest that, but it would go to the Congress and it would basically run out the clock, leaving Mike Pence as acting president until Inauguration Day. Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats have said, and it's in the resolution, that Mike Pence has 24 hours to do that. If he does not, and we have zero indication that he will, in fact, quite the opposite, then the House will move forward with an article of impeachment against the president.
And so in that article of impeachment, they point specifically to the language the president used when he was addressing some of his supporters before the insurrection. He said in part, we fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. I mean, is that convincing for Republicans too? I mean, how many in the House are expected to side with Democrats on this?
Well, more than they did in the first impeachment, and when none of them broke party ranks and went with Democrats. We've seen significantly more criticism of the president, not only for his actions, but for his words, and then how he handled the assault after it was underway. We know that some Republicans, Adam Kinzinger is a Republican from Illinois, said he supports invoking the 25th Amendment. You've had other members, Tom Reed of New York said he didn't necessarily support impeachment, but he would support censure, and would also maybe look at legislation that would bar the president from running from office ever again. So there is a significant, especially if you compare it to the past 4 years, pushback against the president within his own party. But I would caution here that the overwhelming signal from Capitol Hill is that there is still significant loyalty to the president, and I think Democrats are prepared for these to still be mostly party line votes.
Sue, you mentioned that Speaker Pelosi called the House back into session. The Senate is not in session right now. Is there any way that it would be called back into session to vote on impeachment?
There's a lot of complicating factors here, one of which is that Democrats just took control of the Senate. But the two senators that will deliver that majority, the two new senators from Georgia, their elections still need to be certified and they need to be sworn in for that Democratic majority to take place. Incoming Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has said that he's looking at invoking a post-9/11 security measure that would allow the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader alone to call the Senate back into session under certain circumstances. Of course, he would need Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican from Kentucky, to go along with it, and we don't necessarily believe that that's likely to happen. Otherwise, you would need unanimous consent among all senators to come back before Inauguration Day. That's definitely not going to happen. But once an impeachment resolution passes the House, there has to be a Senate trial once they inform the Senate. There's no way around it. So it is a complicating factor for Democrats of how are they going to balance the likelihood of a Senate trial and the first 100 days of the incoming Biden administration, in which they have a very ambitious agenda they want to get started on, and they really need to get Joe Biden and his cabinet nominees confirmed and through the Senate. So there's a lot of moving parts in Washington here, but I think the bigger picture is that Democrats mainly believe that they just cannot let the events that played out last week go without significant punishment. And if a resolution passes, we believe it will pass because Democrats say they already have a vote, it will leave President Trump as the only president in history to ever be impeached twice. And that is a political punishment that many Democrats say is necessary to be paid for what happened.
In the moment that we have left, Sue, I'm mindful that it's not just President Trump that House Democrats are trying to hold accountable. They're also trying to hold accountable some of their own colleagues within Congress. So where do things stand on that effort to hold some other members of Congress accountable for supporting the president's claims of voter fraud?
Well, the biggest impact we've seen right now is in fundraising. Many major American companies, American Express, Marriott, AT&T, have put out statements saying that they will withhold political donations to any lawmaker who voted to object to the Electoral College counts. That could have a potentially really big impact in politics when you think about how important donations are, especially corporate donations to many senior members. There's also talk of potential ethics investigations, potential censure for lawmakers who supported it, and Pat Leahy, the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, suggested that he did not believe that Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, two Republican senators who supported these efforts, should continue to serve on that committee.
All right. NPR congressional correspondent Susan Davis, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Amid all this political turmoil, one of the most powerful men in the Republican Party has died. Sheldon Adelson was a prominent businessman whose casino empire from Las Vegas to China made him incredibly rich. Over the years, he used that wealth to back conservative politicians in the U.S. and Israel and became a major donor to President Trump. He died last night from complications related to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was 87 years old. John Ralston is editor of the Nevada Independent. He's been reporting on Adelson and his political influence for years. John, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And considering Adelson's reach, his death is a big global story for most of us, but for you, it's local news. How are people in Las Vegas reacting?
Well, I think people, despite the fact that he had been ill for quite some time, were taken aback by the report that he had died overnight. But generally, considering, as you mentioned, that he's been such a huge player in the Republican Party, both here and nationally, the statements from Democrats have been pouring in, and they have been very generous, talking about his entrepreneurial vision for the Las Vegas Strip. As you mentioned, he was one of the first to discover Macau as an opportunity for the Las Vegas operators, and he's just been a tremendously influential person. And Democrats here generally have been more afraid of him than anything else, but they've been very, very generous in their comments. For everyone from the governor, who was a Democrat here, to former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid.
So he was a big supporter of Israel. He opposed statehood for Palestinians, which of course was very controversial. How would you describe the kind of person that Sheldon Adelson was, and what was important to him?
You know, he's like any other human being. It's not black and white. There are a lot of people who are already dancing on his grave, such as the nature of the world we live in now. He could be very abrasive. He could be very vindictive, but he could also be very, very generous. He donated a lot of his wealth to charity, including charities that benefited Israel, and so he was a complex man, but he clearly was an influential force beyond almost anyone that we had in Nevada on the national and international stage.
He gave more than $500 million to conservative causes in just the past 8 years. What more can you tell us about the money that he pumped into politics?
It really is a staggering figure. Remember, we don't even know how much dark money he may have given beyond that, right? So but we have to realize this is a guy who, at his apex, was worth $50 or $50 billion. He's worth about $35 million at his death. That is not a lot of money for him, even if you use the aggregate number that you just used. And the thing that people don't really understand about Sheldon Adelson is he was not very hands-on about his political giving. He did not pay attention in a granular way to who he should give to and who he shouldn't give to. He was clearly a conservative and an ideologue on some issues, especially the issue of Israel and especially the issue of taxation. He, like a lot of people, didn't like to pay his taxes, but he didn't pay that close attention to it. He had people for that, as it were, and so that money did not put a real dent in his pocketbook. When you're worth tens of billions of dollars, $500 million is not nearly that much money.
Amazing. In 2016, we know that Adelson had early reservations about Donald Trump, but he actually ended up donating $5 million to Trump's inaugural committee and continued to support the president in his bid for re-election. How would you describe Adelson's role in the rise of Donald Trump?
Well, I think it was huge, and I think it's really interesting because anyone who knows Sheldon Adelson, and I've known him for decades, knows he's a no-nonsense kind of guy, whether you liked him or not. I assure you that Donald Trump was not Sheldon Adelson's kind of guy, but he was a means to an end for Sheldon Adelson, especially in his long quest to have the Israeli embassy, the American embassy in Israel moved to Jerusalem. He saw Trump as someone who would do that for him, and so he went all in. He would never have supported a Democrat, and he would never have been that enthusiastic personally about Trump. So he used Trump as much as anyone did for what had been his long political hobby horse.
You don't have a lot of time here, but did he break with the president at all since Election Day and the turmoil that's happened?
I think he, frankly, was too ill for that to have occurred. He has been very, very sick for some time, and there were rumors that he was going to die last year. That's how sick he has been, and he recently was essentially sent home from the hospital to die. So I doubt there was much time for him to really take stock of that. But my guess is he, like most Americans, would have been outraged by what had occurred since the election.